Let's start. Chapter 26. The truth is, there's a lot of different ways to learn 26, and sometimes you can use it to speak about a lot more theoretical and general ideas, even though the chapter itself is really for us to look at ourselves personally. The biggest thing with 26 is that this is something for us to be telling ourselves and not for us to be lecturing other people about when they're going through sort of kind of struggles. Because now that we've done 1 through 25 and we've learned about our makeup and the way we're functioning and what it really looks like, all the different parts and doing right and wrong and all that kind of stuff, dealing with our moral self and just our character, which is all theoretically within our control. You're in bad behavior and then stop doing the bad behavior. You're the only one who can stop the bad behavior. You want to do a good behavior, so you're the one who can start doing the good behavior. So fine. Now we're going into a whole other section of Tanya. And this is going on for a couple of chapters, this specifically, and then we're going to go talk about other things. The punchline of this one, this is obviously a paraphrase. We're doing all the things that you said we're supposed to be doing, and then what do we do when things happen in life that slow down our train of awesome? Basically, bought into the vanity thing, gonna be such a good person, but there are outside things that are actually not within my control. How do I deal with this? Why it's important to deal with it is because we know specifically we're supposed to serve Hashem with joy. Not just to serve God. We're not supposed to trudge around like zombies. We should have actual joy in our service. It's vital. It gives life to our service. It's not just a cliche or a line to say, but it's something that's very, very important to service. We can know from our own selves, we are our best selves when we are happy. Our happy selves are our best selves. That self is more patient, generous, able to deal better with things, etc. So we want to know, how do we deal with anything that might seem to be an impediment to happiness? Specifically things that are not within our control. Because again, until now, all the things that we spoke about were things that were within our control. You're born a certain way, but all the things that you do with the actions and the personality traits you have, that's within your control. In 26, there's kind of 2 parts to it. 3/4 of the chapter talks about one thing, and then it shifts over a little bit. Because 3/4 of the chapter talks about material things. It mentions specifically health, sustenance, and children. So health, livelihood, and children, which are 3 of the biggest things in a person's life, the most important things in a person's life, and things that could day to day. If all that is in order, if God forbid any of that is not in order, everything's upside down. The last kind of section switches over to spiritual stuff. The other chapters that are in line with this chapter continue with more of the spiritual stuff. There's a lot of discussions that you could have even before you just start this chapter. Very, very practical in day-to-day living, because these are things that we deal with day-to-day living. So there's a lot of things that discussions, issues that you could raise before you even get into the chapter, and that kind of lays the groundwork for it. But one of the things that we have is that coming into this chapter, we have to understand, or we have to agree to certain things. Even if it's a struggle, we agree to it. Number one, that Hashem creates the world every second, which is what we did in the 20s. God spoke, the world came into being. God continues to speak to bring the world into being. This is something that we've learned. We've just gone through this. Then we have the whole idea of the tortoise and the shell, all that sort of stuff. So Hashem creates the world every second. Ergo, Hashem is in total control of the world, which is what we call Hashgacha Protis. Hashgacha Protis means that Hashem is intimately involved in every single aspect of creation. Meaning that there is nothing in this world that occurs without his say-so. There's nothing in this world that occurs without his knowledge of it occurring. So whatever it is, even if it's a big disaster, to us, it seems like a big disaster, things don't just happen. So number one, God is in control. Number two, Hashem is all good. God is good, which means that only good comes from him. The obvious question is, well, this doesn't seem very good right now. We have a lot of things that we could sticker with that. Well, this doesn't seem good right now. But this is starting this chapter with this fundamental belief that because God is good, only good could come from him. Do we understand it? Is what the ultimate question is. So all that happens is with purpose and is good. The question that we have is the good concealed or is it revealed? And then this is kind of a different thing, but it's sort of along the same thing. When Rabbi Shais Taubes does this chapter, he starts with this. Does pain serve a worthy purpose? What I've heard him start with this chapter is pain good or bad? Which is a very good question, because when we think of pain, we think of anything that hurts us. So you can say, well, pain's very bad because it leads to sadness. Is that true though? Because without pain, what would stop you from putting your hand on a burning hot stove? We think of pain as being an emotion, but it's not. It's a response to stimulus. Pain is what tells you, stop. Don't go there. Something's wrong with this picture. We mix a lot. We conflate pain with sadness, and that's not necessarily true. Because sadness, we can generally agree, is not a good thing, but pain is not specifically not a good thing. It's just a thing. And does it serve a worthy purpose? Well, it alerts us. It tells us this is burning right now. This is not safe for you. Something just happened. Something bit you. Without that, what would notify us of things that could be dangerous to ourselves? Now, the other thing you could do, you could take this even a step further, where a lot of people, they don't understand suffering. One way you could look at things is what suffering really is our inability to deal with pain. So people have a lot of complaints about suffering. Why do people suffer? Well, why do people suffer is because we can't handle pain. Think about one person could take a shot and they're fine. The other person takes a shot and it's a whole big thing. One person has the flu and they're fine. One person has the flu and they can't handle it because we can't handle the pain, which leads to the ultimate question of, is pain good or not? Or why do people have to have pain? Why does a child have to go through pain, right? Like that. These are other questions. What we're trying to do now is shift our perspective, because we're dealing with these things of day-to-day life and how we're supposed to deal with them. Because it is very hard. We can have all the answers, it's just difficult. Because implementing this there's nothing easy about any of this. Another thing also, just because we don't understand something doesn't mean there's not an explanation for it. Some explanations we can seek and we can find, and some explanations are so beyond us. Kind of take a generic example. Like we may have mentioned this before. The Friedrich Rebbe, people would try to say anything about, to bring it in, would say anything about the Holocaust. The Friedrich Rebbe would not accept it. No. We cannot give any explanation for any of this. God is the only one who can give an answer for it. Don't even bother trying to come up with any sort of justification that makes this okay to us. Which actually we're going to kind of get to in a second. They actually also had, I think it was on the Living Torah a couple weeks ago. I think it was for Tisha B'Av. A Sikha from the Rebbe, I think in the 80s. As I was playing my phone, I was like, I remember this when the Rebbe started crying during it. The Rebbe did start crying. Because the Rebbe starts talking about, how can we deal with the fact that we're still in Gullus, that every day is getting worse and there doesn't seem to be there's no reprieve. How can we deal with the fact that people are in so much pain, suffering? What are we even supposed to say anymore? So the answer that the Rebbe gave is that obviously we have to wipe away any part of ourselves that could say that there's any good to any of this. The Rebbe says, obviously, we have to clear all that from our minds so we could really ask for Mashiach from a pure place and a place that doesn't allow for any sort of, maybe there's some good to all this. The Rebbe's, that could be the only explanation the Rebbe could come out with. It's something. You hear the Rebbe's crying when he's talking about these things. Everyone writing it to the Rebbe, you could all imagine what he knew of the world and what people were dealing with. Anyways, let's now start with this Chavav. The Alter Rebbe is going to tell us there's a fundamental rule to all this. And that is, Ki kamo shenitzach lenetzach davar gashmi, kegon shnei anashim misapkim ze im ze, lahapel ze ze, hine ima echad hu ba'atzos uchvedus, yunutzach b'kal v'yipol gam im hu gibor yosef mechavero. Just as with victory over a physical opponent, for example, two people wrestling with each other, the top of the other, if one is lazy and sluggish, he will easily be defeated and will fall even if he is stronger than his opponent. What is a fundamental rule for dealing with all of these challenges that come up? Things that cause us deep, overwhelming sadness, that could lead someone to become immobile, to paralyze someone, this kind of sadness. What is a fundamental rule about all this? The same way that two wrestlers are facing off against each other. It doesn't matter who has a better skill, doesn't matter who's more trained, etc., etc., etc. At the end of the day, the person who's going to win is going to be the person who shows up. At the moment of wrestling, the person who is going to exert is going to be the person who wins. What are we saying here? The Alter Rebbe is telling us one thing. When we're dealing with sadness, this is a wrestling opponent that's coming upon us. So first of all, just as kind of as a side bracket, which is not specifically said here, but this is something that sometimes people think about. One of the things the Alter Rebbe is telling us, the fact that you're going through a challenge has nothing to do with who you are as a person. As in, just because you're faced with something right now, it's not because, you're this great sinner, thou shalt suffer, burn in hell. So that's why a person, God forbid, lost a job or whatever. Forget that. That has nothing to do with this right now, what we're talking about right now. The fact that a person can have sadness from any one of these challenges, and we're not discounting that health, children's sustenance, etc., anything else that you want to put there, we're not discounting any of it. Number one, talk about actually dealing with it. The person who shows up is the person who will overcome. So if you're just going to let the sadness, this kind of goes actually, I think, to what you guys were originally talking about. Modern psychology and dealing with emotions, maybe. The person who's going to show up and actually exert effort is the person who will overcome it. So the fact that you're feeling sadness right now is only because you've stepped up your game, you've gone to a certain place, and now the other side, negative forces are coming upon you to throw these challenges your way. Why? Because this is life. This is the life that we deal with. One thing that we have to know is that in every sadness there will be profit. Sadness unto itself doesn't necessarily serve any purpose. Sadness doesn't do anything for anybody on its own. Laughter is good, obviously. There's no such thing as gratuitous laughter. You could have gratuitous nudity, you could have gratuitous language, and gratuitous violence. There's no such thing as gratuitous laughter. Laughter is necessary. Joy and happiness. There's no such thing as gratuitous. Sadness doesn't necessarily do anything for anybody. What does it benefit? However, it says that in every sadness there will be profit, because can we use this sadness and the struggle, can we use it to propel us? That is where the profit would come in. Greater quality joy similar to the distinctive quality of light which follows darkness. Remember we have that Shlomo Melech said, I now know that wisdom is over folly the same way that light is over darkness. What is that even supposed to mean? Like, duh. But the point is that a little bit of wisdom could dispel a lot of folly, the way a little bit of light just automatically dispels darkness. So here, the light that comes out of sadness, as in the joy that comes out of sadness, is a joy that's worth way more than just joy leading to joy kind of thing. There's two things that we're setting up. One, how do we deal with what we're dealing with? And number two, how do we use what we're dealing with to actually get us to a better place? Which is also part of why understanding how the Alter Rebbe gives us certain things. Now again, this is also why we're not going to go and lecture people about this, especially someone who's struggling, God forbid. We go to them, we just, hey, I'm here for you. But for ourselves, these are the things that we kind of have to tell ourselves. So I'm just going to kind of give over a lot of what the chapter says. I have other ideas to bring in, but you'll see how we'll kind of wrap it all up. Now, part of what this is also is that the Talmud tells us, just as one recites a blessing for his good fortune, so must he also recite a blessing for misfortune. Which, what on earth is that supposed to mean? How on earth is a person supposed to bless God for misfortune the same way, not just, also say, this is God's doing, this is fine, but a wholehearted blessing the same way as if you just won $1 million, and then the same way if someone just ran into your car or something. You're supposed to have the same amount of joy and blessing in both of them. Which ultimately what it's saying is that there's a purpose that what God is doing is allowing to happen to you right now. Whatever that purpose is, it gets you to a certain kind of place, which is why all that comes comes from God is good, we just don't know if it's a concealed or revealed good. Kigam Zalatova, because this is also for the good. Rakshana Niglis Veneris Lena Vasar. It's just not revealed to our physical eyes. What are we saying here? Context. All the things that occur to us, we don't see it as good, but Gam Zalatova, this is also good. Whatever it is, whatever occurs, we're supposed to know this is also good. While it doesn't look like good to me right now, that's only because you with your eyes, you can't see it as good. We're people. We can't see it. God understands it. God sees it all as good. So the fact that someone is, God forbid, struggling with parnasa or whatever they're going through right now, you see it as a hardship and a struggle. That doesn't mean that it's not good. There's an idea in general, and actually we have it here, that sometimes a lot of things that seem especially negative in this world, it's because their source is a higher level of good. So by the time they come down into this world, the world can handle it. So within it coming down to this world, it doesn't come out the way that it looked from its original source. So it's sort of the same way like when you have a wall, the stones that are higher on a wall will fall farther than stones that are lower down on a wall. So there's an idea that good is like that also. Sometimes good that's coming from a much higher source, when it comes down into this world, because the world can't handle it so much, it ends up being a way more concealed good than a good that's straight up revealed might be coming from a lower source. So that's also one that the Alter Rebbe tells us, that sometimes when you go through something that seems to be particularly not good, it doesn't mean that it's not good. The goodness of it is way more concealed because of how high the goodness is coming from. The concept is very hard. You said hard. I think extremely hard. How are we supposed to look at things that happen to certain people and say this is good? Or to ourselves even, and this is good? You know what? Even our own struggles, there are certain things that God makes happen, and it's just, you don't have any other ideas? I think there's other ways that you can make things happen. So that's why we have this here. The big question mark. Does God play dice with the universe? Does he just confetti creation? Or is there actual purpose? Is there a blueprint to all of it? If you grew up in a cave somewhere and you walk into this room and you see these people standing around in white coats and they're sawing up someone's leg, you'd go tackle them. You'd go crazy. What did they explain to you? That the reason why this person's having amputation is because the leg has to be removed to save the rest of the body. We see the leg removal. We don't understand how it saves the rest of the body. Life is like chutes and ladders. Sometimes you're climbing up the ladder, sometimes you're going along paces, and sometimes you seem to be on a slide that sends you back many spaces. As a general idea, I think we understand what a lot of the technical thing is. At the end of the day, we still have to figure out how to deal with stuff, especially stuff that doesn't make sense. I'm just using this kind of as a generic example so we don't get too specific with things. Let's say someone has this really big dream of, and a wholehearted, pure dream of giving $5,000 to tzedakah or whatever it is. And open up a new school or something and it's going to be accept everyone. It doesn't matter tuition or whatever. And the guy for his entire life cannot figure out how to rub two pennies together. Like, what does God care about? Doesn't he want people to give tzedakah? Why can't he just give him his $50,000, $100,000, however much it would cost him to do whatever he wants to do? Just give it to him. Who freaking cares? Why can't he have it? And it's coming from a very good place. Someone who sincerely wants to do something. Everyone's going along and they're doing their thing. Why do you have to start putting road bumps in the road for people? Was that necessary? What are you doing? So this is actually something that, I don't remember Parshat's in. You may have heard this before. So you had the sin of the golden calf and Moshe was asking for forgiveness. Then there was a certain thing there that he realized that there was an Eis Ratzon over there. So he asked Hashem that he wants to see Harinina es Kodecha. Show me your ways. When you translate it literally, it means, God, I want to see your glory. And Hashem said, no person could see. A person can't see me and live. So when you translate it literally, oh, show me your glory. God says, if you see my ultimate glory, then a person can't live. Can't handle the great light of God. Then the whole thing with hiding the cleft of the rock and the knot of the tefillin and pass by behind, that whole story that happens. But we'll take it, we'll bring it into this chapter. Moshe says, explain to me why you work the way you work. Show me your ways. It's not just show me your glory, it's show me your way. Explain to me why this and this has to occur. Rashi, I think, has the whole explanation of the person on the ladder and the person fell and the whatever, the murderer and the whatever it is. God says, a person can't see my ways and live. What does that mean? If you would understand the way God functions, you cannot live as a human being. There would be no compassion. There would be nothing. There would be no emotion toward anything. Think of the difference. The kids that were acting all berserk and they're jumping, you're like, you guys better stop that or you're gonna fall. And then the kid falls and he starts crying. Well, what did I tell you? Why are you not sad? Where's your compassion for the kid? No, I'm sad. It's not a tragedy that he fell because I told him he was gonna fall. Because as soon as we understand it, it takes the tragedy out of the sadness. It takes the questions out of the sadness because we see exactly why things occurred. So, a person can see me. The price that we pay for compassion, the price that we pay for humanity is the not knowing. Because if we would actually know, then there would be no compassion for another person. There would be no question. There would be nothing that goes along with all the things that we actually do for someone else when they're going through something. So that's one thing with all of that. Would it be worth it? We actually just had this conversation. We went through this chapter again with the other class. And the woman, they were, as much as you hate it, most of them agreed that it's not worth it. The compassion and the humanity is not worth giving up just for the understanding. Even though the understanding would make life so different. Part of why everything is so difficult is not just the pain and the suffering and all that. It's also frustration. frustration and anger. Where did the frustration and anger come from? Not understanding. You just explain it to me, I'll be able to deal with it a little bit better. That happens with everything. Why are you doing this? Well, as soon as you explain to me, you're like, well, okay, maybe I don't agree with you, but I can handle what you're doing right now. Okay, I understand where they're coming from. That changes things. So that's one thing. Another thing, so my Uncle Gary should say when he passed away, they did a shloshim for him. It was 2020, right before Pesach. So the month later, they did a shloshim and different people saying stories. He was very good with administrative stuff. He was very good with getting an office in order kind of thing. So these people had an organization that helps special needs, the families with special needs or something like that. So they said, the guy was telling the story that when they originally started, there was one guy who was part of it with them, and then I think eventually he like moved on to other things. So he sort of like was there for the founding of the organization, or he worked there for part of it, administrative stuff, whatever it was, he was part of the organization for a little bit, and then he went on to other things. And then however many years later, a couple of years later, him and his wife, they had a baby, and he didn't specify, but it seemed like there was something very sickly about the baby, and then the baby passed away. And this guy, the person who's telling the story we're talking about specifically, he was struggling with that. He was obviously understated. It's a very not cool situation going on, and he had a hard time with it. And part of his dealing with it is that how could someone who was part of this organization look at all the mitzvahs? He knows of all the great mitzvahs, part of all the mitzvahs and all the things that he's done. Why would he have to go through all this? So he sat there, he had a conversation with my uncle, and my uncle said, imagine if you would think of it that God knew he was going to have to go through this in his life. So God arranged it that he would be part of this organization so that when this would happen to him, he would have better tools for handling it. He would better know how to deal with what he had to go through. We have blinders onto our own personal lives, and we have blinders onto our own personal understanding of things. So often when we're going through things, it's all about, why do I have to go through this? And it's not, God's making me go through this. What can I do about it? What ultimate purpose can this serve? The fact that I had to go through all this. Because the question already of why we have to go through it, that's another thing which we'll probably never understand. One thing that we could find understanding in, though, is what can I do about this now? Who can I help now that I've been through this? What understanding can I apply to the next thing because of what I've been through? So what we're trying to do is that we're talking about sadness is going to be profit and all these things. We're trying to take things and flip them around, because if not, we're in the wrestling match and this sadness is going to overtake us to the point of debilitation. It overtakes us to the point where we don't want to get out of bed in the morning, and then not just that we don't want to, but we actually don't. That means the other side won. It's not a denial of the fact of anything that we have to go through, any of the sadness or anything like that. What we're trying to combat right now is the sadness slowing us down or stopping us after we have already the whole perspective thing. That if nothing else, God knows what's going on, because nothing in the world happens without his say-so. The first time I taught this chapter, and I couldn't figure out how to approach this chapter because of the people in the class, and so the only thing with looking up is the epiphany that I had is that we've kind of said this before, but you ask the question of where does the sun go on a cloudy day? You ever think about that? Where are the stars during the day? If you have a proper telescope for seeing them, they're there. But we don't see them. We can only see the stars in darkness. Even though the sun's always there, we can only see the sun during the daytime, or when it's not cloudy. The sun during a cloudy day hasn't gone anywhere. It's just been blocked. Or we've turned away from it. But the sun doesn't go anywhere. And where do the stars go during the day? They haven't gone anywhere either. We just don't have the proper format to see it. Either you need a very strong telescope, or you need to wait for darkness to fall. So you can take the light and the darkness metaphor. Night and day are for hardships. Sometimes in the hardships is when we see the individual blessings, versus when it's sunny outside and everything's so great, we don't always necessarily see. And sometimes in the darkness, it allows us to refocus on all the little details that we can be appreciative of. We're trying to take these things and figure out how do we get through them and how do we deal with them. Nothing is going to erase the fact that we're going to feel pain or sadness from these things. A person can't see me live. Well, you wouldn't be human either if you didn't feel from these sort of things. The lobsters that they throw in boiling hot water. Humans are not lobsters. If you throw us in boiling hot water, we hurt. So we can't erase it. What we're trying to do is figure out how do we deal with it. First of all, putting it into perspective. It's not chance. God's not playing dice with the universe. God doesn't just confetti creation. There's ultimate purpose to all this. We don't see the ultimate purpose to all of this. Somehow there is good in all this. That's what the facts are somehow. Funny also, when it comes to Hashgacha Protis, part of Hashgacha Protis I didn't fully understand either until I became a writer. Because as a writer, you have to put your character through a lot of different things. You can't just give them sunshines and unicorn. First of all, there's no story, but also nothing happens to your character if they don't go through anything. There has to be struggle, there has to be hardship, because that's what changes us as people. That's how we find what we're really capable of, which maybe if we weren't so capable, maybe God would ease our burdens a little bit. But let God ease the burdens of even with us being so capable. Let us show what we could do in happy times too. So the characters, you have to make them deal with you have to make bad things happen, because there is no progression otherwise. So unfortunately, it's kind of mirroring the human condition of we don't change otherwise. And whether we change for good or not good. Now, you always have these stories of like, because I got fired from my job, that's why I started my dream job, and now I'm a multi-billionaire. So that, of course, we can actually see it. Oh, I see why this had to occur, because now I see down the road why this. That's if we get a blessing that we have of, okay, I didn't love the hard part, but I see where it led me to, and I see the ultimate good it led me to. Because a lot of times we don't see it. And this is part where we have to deal with it, that there somehow has to be this underlying implicit trust in God, that we're not in free fall, that there is some picture to all of this. This picture is a beautiful picture somehow. There's no depth without shadow. You're not 3D without it. Why did God have to create this world this way? Well, that's an ultimate question for God to answer. But we have to try to give ourselves the tools to handle things as best as possible. Yes. Oh yeah, that's good. Looking at the sun directly was more painful. Well, also what this chapter does talk about that, all of this is supposed to lead to having a deeper connection with God, of saying that, oh, the struggle that I'm going through is supposed to draw me closer to him, because whatever he's doing is for my ultimate good. Sometimes you have to re-break a finger for it to grow correctly. Sometimes it's that sort of thing. So it's supposed to draw you closer because you recognize that this is good, what's being given to you, and I wouldn't get it on my own. And whatever this progression I'm going through, I wouldn't get that either on my own. Well, and when Mashiach comes, we're going to see the hidden world that we can't see now. We will understand that when Mashiach comes, so it's all good, but these are the anchors and the tethers that help us weather the storm sort of thing, but we still have to weather the storm. One of the biggest things that the Alter Rebbe is trying to prevent is that when you're going through, ultimately, he doesn't want there to be sadness at all, because there can only be sadness if you're not understanding that what God's doing for you is good. Obviously, that's a very high level. But at least what we could do, and we could do this even not being on such a high level, is we can use the sadness with purpose, or we could give purpose to the sadness. The fact that I'm going through something, whatever it's going to do to fortify me, to widen my understanding, however it's going to forge me and change me, what good can I take out of all this to give to somebody else? God forbid someone else is going through a similar situation, so when I'm going to be there in support to them, I'm going to feel like a more reliable pillar of support because I really can understand what they've gone through, or something like that. I'm not going to let the sadness just be this floating algae on the top of the lake. I'm going to turn it into something that's going to have purpose. These are not necessarily things that are also easy to think about while you're weathering the storm. Sometimes you need to be out of the storm to be able to start thinking of these things. Prepare for the worst and pray for the best, hope for the best kind of thing. If we're going to be realistic, that's not exactly what Tanya's telling us, kind of our starting point for us. Now, even though the second part of the chapter kind of shifts a little bit to talk about spiritual sadness, it still relates to this. Yes, man's search for meaning. Victor Frankl. The Alter Rebbe now shifts over spiritual sadness, as in sadness over spiritual failing. I'm not good enough, I don't measure up, and I always do things wrong, I'm such a sinner, blah, blah, blah. There's what the Alter Rebbe calls merirus and atzvus. Merirus is bitterness, remorse, kind of. Atzvus is like depression. The difference that the Alter Rebbe says that merirus is something that's alive and active versus atzvus is something that's resigned and is kind of dead. If we can't get rid of the sadness, we want to channel it toward merirus and not let it fall into atzvus. Because what atzvus does, what depression does, it debilitates us. It holds us down, it weighs us down. Merirus is something that you can use to change. So a lot of people don't like necessarily bitterness because like, oh, you're a bitter person, but that's not what it means. Pain is also not the exact translation of it, but using it as pain is like, because this hurts me, how do I get out of it? How do I change it? So merirus is the feeling of, I don't want to be like this anymore. It's that kind of bitterness. I don't like this. So how do I change this? It's when you're using this negative situation or emotion to propel yourself toward goodness and change and being better. So that's what we have here. Basically, what the Alter Rebbe is talking about here is a person who's going about their regular day, and all of a sudden this wave of sadness comes over them. The Alter Rebbe says, look at where it's coming from and where it's going to. If this wave of sadness that's coming over you is stopping you in the middle of your day, obviously it's not coming from a good place. Going back to the wrestling metaphor, it's the other side stepping up its game. Because where is it coming from otherwise? There's nothing productive that is coming from this right now. Sometimes we want to sink into the negative emotion because I don't want to deal with it. What the Alter Rebbe is bringing out right now is what the other side tries to do is get you into a place of bitterness and sadness that's resignation, a dead kind of sadness. Why? Because I don't care, I don't want to, and all this is irrelevant anyways. Then you engage in some sort of not good behavior to either alleviate or just ignore the sadness. Well, who cares anyway, so let's go eat a tub of ice cream. After you eat the tub of ice cream, you feel sick with yourself that you just ate a full tub of ice cream, which brings you back to the sadness. And now because you're feeling sad, you're like, well, screw that anyways, now I'm just going to go to bed. And it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So what it's trying to do is to create this self-perpetuating cycle of not good behavior. It's trying to use sadness in that kind of way because there are times for sadness. There are times for regret. There are times for the bitterness, bidoy, or anything like that. At nighttime, you go through it, or Yom Kippur, or whatever it is. During the day when you're cutting your salad is not a time for depression. It's not. And it doesn't, because this is not something to be sad about. It's coming right now, trying to slow your train of awesome. It's trying to give you reasons because there's nothing to do with the validity of the reason. Is it okay to feel sadness about that sort of thing? That's irrelevant. It doesn't matter about the validity of the sadness. It matters that the sadness is trying to come over you right now to try to stop you in the middle of your day, which also goes back to part of the original things, that the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis that could cause us trial, tribulation, sadness, challenges, etc. So there's a process that people usually have to go through, and the healthy thing is to go through that process. Not all of us are at the level that if a person loses their job or something, God forbid, they're like, woohoo, I'm closer to God now. Most people are not. They got to swear, they got to kick something, they got to be all upset. They need a few hours of just nothingness, and then they can start dealing with things again. But you know that I'm working through the process because I'm going to get it out and then I'm going to get somewhere else. It's part of that also. Okay, whatever it's coming from, it's from God, so we shouldn't allow it to become a debilitating sadness. But also to realize that whatever sadness we have to go through now, whatever downswing we have to go through now, we don't let it stay down. We have to use it, come back up again. We use it to try to propel ourselves forward again. That's the gist of chapter 26, basically.